Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Hazards of the Old Ones, Part 2, Chapter 4, The Cavern. In our last chapter, Lady Poe of Blanchfort out on a date, essentially, with Lord Haver'L of Merryweather, a lord from a prominent banking family, and he lives in the city of Bern, and Bern is sort of like the financial center of Cana, and much of the League as well, as Cana is the heart of the League. Poe had always, throughout her life, wanted to live the high life in the various social circles of the League. She wanted to be courted by handsome gentlemen. She wanted to be swept away, shown the League. She wanted to see beautiful things and do fun stuff. But for the bulk of her life, for over 200 years, she had been considered social poison, as she seemed to be mentally damaged. Oftentimes she walked about in a daze, mumbling, walking into things, and in the League that's just not done. The League is young and healthy, and to have someone with an infirmity is not normal. And so Lady Poe never really got to do any of these things, and then it was discovered that she's actually a Shadowtech female, and it was Shadowtech poisoning that was creating these problems for her. And then she became very popular as black hats were becoming popular. And Lady Poe is a significantly less volatile, less dangerous option for those wanting to court a black hat, as Poe isn't going to kill anybody trying to court her. A weird ship lands on Haver'L's grounds. It reeks of Shadowtech. Poe is instantly alarmed. It creates a pulse or a wave of Shadowtech, and it kills everything within a certain distance. It kills the grass. It kills any animals it happens to pass by. And it killed Lord Haver'L and most of his family. Very, very tragic. Poe, being a Shadowtech female, her Silvertech largely counteracted the Shadowtech, so she was protected, but it still made her very weak and very ill. And then here comes Princess Vrock of Xandar to capture Poe, to take her to the Black Hats as they requested. Poe lassos her in a stream of Silvertech and basically throws her off the roof. As she was about to crash into the ground, Poe sort of lost consciousness momentarily because of the Shadowtech. Vrock wafted back up to the roof and then began mercilessly beating Lady Poe about the head and shoulders with the butt of her gun. Not very pleasant. This week we continue Chapter 4, The Cavern, and I mentioned last week that this chapter almost spelled the end of my fledgling writing career. After writing this chapter, I almost stopped. And here's why. I had joined a writing group here in my hometown. I only knew a couple of people in the writing group. I had been in several, and some I was very familiar with all the people, and it was pretty informal, and it was pretty helpful to get your thoughts sorted out as a writer, to bounce your ideas off a welcoming group where any critiques you will receive are from trusted sources and heartfelt in their delivery. This group, I really didn't know anybody very well. I turned in The Cavern. So obviously the Cavern is in Part 2, Chapter 4. It's well over 100 pages into the book. Probably wasn't very fair of me to start in the middle of a book and turn it in and have people read something that they weren't familiar with. The preamble up to that chapter, just reading what they were given. And I got my little boopy handed to me. I got savage. People, they just read this and said I couldn't even finish it. It was horrific. It was terrible. One in particular, the leader of the writing group, just let me have it. He was an old, angry guy, and he said there is absolutely no creativity here, no consistency, no talent here. This is just word salad adding up to nothing. You should take every bit of this work, any chapters before and any after, and everything else you've ever written, throw it into a dumpster. And then you should apologize to this writing group for forcing us to endure this pile of verbose hootin', and you should then apologize to the dumpster for bearing your load. When in such a situation, when you're just getting ripped apart, you can do one of several things. You can throw your hands up in humiliation and quit. Say, okay, this isn't for me. Because when you create something, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a book, a piece of writing, a piece of music, poetry, anything. You are stripped bare, and you are essentially handing people your heart on a plate, just waiting for them to devour it if they so choose. Having a really bad critique session where you're just getting mercilessly ripped apart is devastating. And for many people, it's just heartrending, and it's too much to bear, and people stop. Like, I was humiliated, and I cannot continue. The second thing you can do is get mad, and like, well, screw you all. Apparently, every single one of you aren't smart enough to understand what I gave you. Maybe you're just too dumb. Is this work a problem with me, or is this a problem with you? And I think it's you. And that's not a very good position to take. That's one from anger. And that's one from entitlement. Like, I created this. Now you have to love it. And nothing that's ever been created deserves that. Every time you create something and put it out there, it's a fresh trial. And whatever verdict you get is what you get. And you can't expect people just to love you for whatever reason. The third choice, and probably the best one in my opinion, is you take your critique, you develop a thick skin, you look at what you're getting back from the critiquers, and if any of it makes sense, like, okay, that's a good point, then incorporate it into your work. Make some changes, make some tweaks. And the rest, if it's all just yibbish, as my wife says, then disregard it. You have to have the thickest of skin. You have to be able to shrug off things that people say when it's delivered from a position of malice. Because, again, nobody knew me in this writing group. These people weren't my friends. They're seeing this work, and a lot of people in these writing groups just live just to rip you down, just to give a bone-grinding critique and let that person know how you feel, whether those critiques are warranted or not. Some people can be spiteful and can take joy in things like that. Isn't that right, Arlie? You have to be able just to siphon the wheat from the chaff. Say, okay, here's some good points here. The rest of it, I'm just going to disregard. And I'm going to keep doing what I do regardless. If you come across someone like that, you say, well, sorry you didn't like it, but I'm going to keep on doing what I do. And that is how you have to be when you're a creative, a writer, an artist, a musician, whatever. It's completely the same. You have to have the fortitude to have your vision and to see it through to the end. No matter what anyone has to say, if you have a work that you believe in, that's fleshed out and realized from beginning to end, then you proceed, guns blazing, no matter what, and you take the slings and arrows as they come. You have the hard thrasos, not to be discouraged by bad things that are said, but to be encouraged by good things when those come, and just by the notion that you did your best in your opinion. You have to be a critical of your own work. You have to see from a helicopter sort of vision and say, is this work that I'm doing substantial, or is it not? In that same writing group, one fellow kept turning in the same chapter every week. You turn it in, get critiqued, make changes, rinse and repeat over and over. And after a while, I said, you've basically become a ghostwriter for a committee. Where is your vision in all of this? You have to get to a point when you say, this is what it is, and I'm not gonna make any more substantial changes just because of criticism. This is what it is, and I'm gonna plow ahead and tell my story. That's what you have to do. And that's what almost happened with the Cavern. And I selected, obviously, option 3. Some people did make some good points, and I did incorporate them into the writing. The rest, I just shrugged it off, like, your words are not helpful to me. And that was that. And I never went back to that writing group again. And then, about 10 books later, I'm still at it. Much better for the experience, much more grizzled and tanned than I was previously. In any event, this chapter is one of my favorite chapters. I like the events, how it proceeds. I like the character development that we get. I like how it moves the plot along. There's a lot of concepts introduced in this chapter, which have roots in the rest of the story. And we'll see what you think. You see if I should have just thrown this into a dumpster and then apologized to the dumpster, as Arlie recommended. Didn't happen, did it, Arlie? Any event, let's proceed immediately. Part 2, Chapter 4, The Cavern. Kai had never been so miserable in her life. She stood there on the dock amid the crowd of cheering people, watching the Seeker take off. The ship created an artificial rainstorm as it rose, water pouring off of its belly. She felt a whole bunch of things as she stood there on Blanchford Dock. She felt left out, unimportant, insignificant, sad, anxious, and angry. Standing there amid the waving, cheering crowd, the husbands and wives, the boy and girlfriends, she felt like she used to long ago in Tusk as she trawled the marketplaces with her brothers and sisters looking for food. She felt like a ruddy peasant, and it was a feeling she didn't like one little bit. Kylos was wearing a long tan dress and a pair of soft leather boots that she'd bought on one of the shops near the dock earlier that day. She just stomped into the shop, pulled the dress off the racks without bothering to look at it much. It didn't have any obvious patterns or prints, which was how she wanted it, so she bought the thing, and the boots too. The dress didn't fit. It was too big, draped over her lean body like a billowy flag, tangled around a flagpole, but she really didn't care. It was something to put on, better than going naked. Her new soft boots without a heel and a hard sole hurt her feet. She felt like she wasn't wearing shoes, and unlike Sig, who could walk through broken glass, Kai, tough as she was a real tenderfoot, top to bottom, without her beloved Marine uniform for the first time in a long while. She felt very naked. She carried a large bag, a purse, also new, that she stuffed her things from the ship into. She hated dresses, she hated purses. Gah! She felt like a girl. She wanted her uniform back. Kai had been amazed, but not necessarily surprised, how quickly she'd been debriefed and shuffled out of the Marines. They'd arrived that morning in a Marine cutter ship, and, in a matter of an hour or two, she was out-processed, removed of all her uniforms and rank insignia, and loudly de-oathed. As a final bit of good measure, she was thrown into the brig for 40 minutes. When they let her out, she was busted down to private for not following her chain of command, they said in angry tones. When it was finally over, they escorted her from the cutter ship to the dock at gunpoint, no less. The Marine command at Zero Foxtrot was not happy about her sudden and undiscussed departure from the Seeker. They were not happy at all. They were incensed that she hadn't consulted with or suitably warned them ahead of time regarding her desire to leave. They wanted a Marine in as first officer on the Seeker, and they wanted her replacement to be a Marine as well. The posting gave the service a fair amount of prestige. Now, no doubt, some fleet character will be trotted out to fill the role, and they needed to scramble if they wanted to salvage the situation. She heard one of the big shots down at Zero F wanted to launch a full-scale investigation into the matter and uncover the scope of her misconduct. Apparently, nothing came of it. When they were done with her, they put her off on the dock in a disposable prisoner's jumpsuit complete with the word inmate printed across the back, as she had nothing else to wear. They handed Kai her final back pay and threw her personal possessions at her in a small heap. Then they took off, not even asking if she needed a lift to wherever. She stood there in her brand new dress and peasant's boots, feeling sad, feeling the wind creep up in places she wasn't accustomed to. Her world spun around her. Her replacement. A dishonored private. How had all of this happened? It still didn't feel real to her. She watched the Seeker rise as long as she could stand it, stoic, arms crossed at her chest. Then, grimacing, she plugged her ears and gritted her teeth. The Seeker was, even at a distance, deafening. These people grinning and waving must all be half deaf or something. When the ship was no longer in sight and the people on the dock went their separate ways, she stood there alone, not quite knowing what to do. Like a ghost in a sheet, she numbly whirled around after a time and wandered into a pub, one that she normally didn't familiar. She didn't want anybody she knew to see her like this, a nobody. She saddled up to the bar and drank. She wanted to get good and drunk. If things went well, maybe she'd end up in a nice soothing fight with some urchin or dirty courtesan. She hoped so. She felt mad. She felt like hitting. But getting into a big brawl dressed like this just won't do. She'd probably end up getting beaten up, her dress hiked up over her head, her exposed knickers laughed at by all. She wanted to be on that ship. Creation, what was she doing here? Finally, drunk, feeling sorry for herself, feeling abandoned, she stumbled out of the pub and began slowly walking towards Dav's castle. The castle loomed over the village in the mountains high above. Nobody had the decency to pick a fight with her all afternoon. Nobody even messed up her name like they always did. No, you piece of batshit. It's not kilos, like in your head weighs 10,000 kilos. It's Kai Los. Kai, as in kite, then Los. Kai Los. You get me? Nobody even asked her name, come to think of it. They left her alone and let her drink, let her wallow in self-pity. Nobody even propositioned her. She was always getting propositioned in the pubs, at least a couple times a night by sailors and frat boys from the college, and she'd show them her wedding ring or pop them in the nose if they got too forceful. But that was when she was a somebody, a Marine lieutenant. Now she was a nobody in a sheet-like dress and a pair of ugly boots, not worth approaching for a one-night stand. She initially had thought to check herself into an inn until she could book passage back to Tusk, but Dav had talked her into staying at his castle. He pleaded with her, in fact, handing Kylos a key to the 110-story tall Pendar Tower, a medium-sized tower in the northwest section of the castle. He begged her to stay there for as long as she wanted. He said the tower was hers. He needn't have begged. She wanted to stay there. She wanted to hold on to as much of him as she could. Lady Poe, always kind and matronly, had conjured up a tweeter for her to use while she was a guest in the castle. Kai's sense of direction was every bit as bad as Lady Poe's, and her tiny, chirping Silvertech familiar was dynamite for finding one's way in uncertain situations. The first time Poe had created Tweeter specifically for the purpose of helping her find her way through the unfamiliar cities and castles she was now getting to see as a rising star in League society, it had taken days of careful thought and planning, with a great number of frustrating missteps in between to get him right. With practice, she could now pop one up as needed in just a few minutes. All you had to do was tell Tweeter where you wanted to go, and he got you there without fail, infallibly accurate. Able to operate indoors and deep underground, he was much better than a handheld ranger device. And Kai had to admit he was cute. A cute little guy. He appeared as a mechanical silver bird with a slightly oversized belly area, like a golf ball with wings and a beak. Lady Poe loved happy faces. She made all her Silvertech creations that way, and Tweeter was no exception. He had bright, winsome eyes and a beak that was curved into a permanent smile. His delicate legs and bird feet were articulated in a mechanical fashion. Under his right wing was Lady Poe's stamp, her Blanchford coat of arms, another common feature of all her Silvertech creations. Poe's stamp was her seal of approval, an assurance that he would work as he was supposed to. For stays alone in Dav's massive castle, Kai needed Tweeter badly. The place was a confusing maze of passages, corridors, halls, and stairs, where she got hopelessly lost at the drop of a hat. Sig loved the castle like that. A tempting black forest of undiscovered places to explore. She always wanted Kai to follow her into some tiny, dirty crawl space she'd discovered, but Sig could get around with ease, some sort of an arcane internal black hat sense of direction deal that she had. Kai, though, had no patience for not knowing where she was going, and Dav's castle was impossible. She recalled staying there once with her husband for a celebration, and leaving their guest tower in the middle of the night to get a little something to eat. She lost her way. She wandered around the endless corridors in her pajamas like a ghost. She was lost until daybreak, when she encountered a staff member. With one of Poe's tweeters, though, Kai had no worries. The Marines had wanted to confiscate Tweeter and the Pendar Tower key as they roughly outdrummed her. They went over Tweeter's little chirping body with a microscope, looking for any serial number, laser strand, or other mark identifying him as Stellar Marine property. They found no marks other than Lady Poe's coat of arms, and grudgingly gave him back to her along with the key, tossed in the pile with all her other worthless stuff. Walking out of the pub in the amber light of dusk, Kai fished around, digging Tweeter out of her bag, and let him go. With silver wings, he fluttered up to a nearby windowsill and looked down at her, happy-faced, eager to get started. His little head twitched about in a bird-like fashion. "Get me to my room in Pendar Tower, Tweeter, as quickly as possible," she muttered. He chirped and fluttered a bit down the lane. There he stopped and waited for her on an eave, amid the glowing lanterns, banners, and colorful lights that were softly lighting up the dusk. It was a party atmosphere tonight in the village near the dock, and the locals were gathering in the streets to celebrate. Slowly she staggered down the lane, past all the people and street vendors. When she got near, Tweeter took flight and went a little further. The process repeated itself until she had gone several blocks down Bloodstein Road. The crowd thinned accordingly as she passed into the quiet outer reaches of Sciontown, where many of the villagers lived. She expected Tweeter to take her east to Hanover Road through the old brickyards, and then up the long switchback road to the castle. How else could one get up there? It was going to be a long walk up the steep road. She didn't mind. She felt like a long, lonely slog anyways. Maybe she'd get sick somewhere along the way. Maybe she'd pass out. Instead of all that, Tweeter flew into a shop. A small, quaint grocery lit up in soft white light. Kylos, curious, walked in after him. "Evening, miss," the grocer said with a smile as he restocked his shelves after a busy day. The store was empty of customers. The grocer had a small AirNet terminal powered up at the counter. Some sort of sporting event droned on the floating screen. Miss. He called her Miss. She fumed. Peasants were called Miss. She'd rather be called Lieutenant. Of course she wasn't a lieutenant anymore. She'd even settle for Hey You. Anything but Miss. She made her way into the brightly lit interior of the store. Tweeter was sitting on a basket of apples, casting the fruit in a pleasing silver glow. As she approached, he fluttered even farther into the back. "What are you doing, Tweeter?" she whispered, annoyed. He landed on an odd pillar in the back of the grocery and butted up against the wall, where strings of garlic hung. As Kai approached, he hopped down and flew into a small hole at the bottom of the pillar, partially blocked by a basket full of turnips. She would never have noticed the hole if he hadn't gone into it. "Tweeter!" she hissed in a loud whisper. The Airnet terminal up front suddenly gave a roar. Somebody must have scored. She moved the basket aside, looked to see where Tweeter went. The hole traveled down at an odd angle and disappeared. To her eye, the hole looked nothing more than a shallow air vent. She could see Tweeter's silvery light inside, bouncing around. Kai knew that Lady Poe, after a few embarrassing misadventures, had redesigned Tweeter so he wouldn't try to take you any way you couldn't possibly follow. So obviously, though the hole seemed impossibly small, she should be able to fit. And she did tell him to get her back as quickly as possible. This must be a shortcut, one of those odd tunnels Sig was always raving about. "Miss?" the owner asked from the front of the store. Again with the miss thing, she thought. She considered waiting for the grocer and telling him that she'd lost her bird, and then walk out into the new night and take the dark switchback up to the castle. But then she pictured Sig fearlessly crawling through the tunnels scattered through the castle and the village in her hospitaller bodysuit and bare feet. She recalled the villagers speaking about their countess, how she could suddenly appear from nowhere, but without the wind and noise of a waft. Obviously, this was an entrance to a tunnel. She wondered if Sig, filthy and exhausted, had popped out of this hole at some point in the past. Sig. How Kai loved her. And disliked her a little bit, too. How Sig had taken Dav, her best friend, and married him, dominated his time, kept him for herself, her love endless and smothering. Kai felt ashamed for those thoughts. Dav was happy. Sig made him so happy, and that should be enough for her. She should feel glad that her friend's wounded heart was finally healed. Still, she longed for the old days when it was just the two of them, best friends, inseparable. She made up her mind at that point. She was determined not to be outdone. If Sig could do it, so too could she. She knelt down, stuffed her bag in, and crawled into the hole. The hole was small, only about 14 inches high, and went down at about a 19-degree angle. The dirty stone pressed on both her back and her stomach at once, like an unmovable straitjacket. She could feel her dress catching on the rough surface. Kai struggled. She didn't really like tight spaces. After a few more thrashes, she was wedged in like a sausage and quite stuck. If she hadn't been so drunk, she might really start panicking. She supposed she could start screaming and hope the grocer heard her, but that was a scenario she really didn't want to be any part of. Here's how she foresaw it happening. She'd scream until the grocer heard her, then, unable to free her himself, he will go and get help, probably from the town magistrate. The magistrate of Blanchford, like any officer of very little to do, will no doubt make a big spectacle over this, and sounding the alarm, he'd bring half the village to witness him presiding over this event, this noble rescue. Then, standing over the hole she'd got stuck in, he will piously lecture the bottoms of her boots as he pulled her out. No thanks, she'd rather not. So here she was, stuck in a tiny hole. Tweeter ahead patiently blinked, waiting for her to continue. Being a Johnny from Onaris, nothing overly impressed her, not even her fears, and she had a lot of those if she thought about it. Fear, though initially scary, wasn't really a big deal, just a lot of nonsense when she faced up to it and let it pass by. She'd been in a lot of gunfights, especially in her early days in the Marines, where she'd been paralyzed with fear at the outset. Once the bullets started flying and she got a good look at the Joe boy shooting at her, her fear quickly dried up, replaced with smug indifference. Hey, look at that loser over there. He must have lost a razor, or possibly his mother dressed him blindfolded that morning. Tack! Tack as she leveled her SK and blasted away, belatedly joining the party. She couldn't go back, so she might as well go forward. She took a moment and composed herself, let all the air out of her lungs, and began crawling. The space was too small for her to get up on her elbows and crawl, so arms out in front of her like a diver, she used her long, strong fingers, moving one finger length at a time. The tight hole was illuminated in silver light by Tweeter standing there in the distance. As before, he hopped away as she neared him. Slowly, pushing her bag ahead of her, she moved deeper and deeper into the tiny hole, dragging herself with her fingers, embracing the stone, not fearing it any longer. "Gonna get it over this, Tweeter, as soon as you get me out of here," she grunted, her voice in a tin can as she pulled herself along. After about 100 feet, the hole opened up a bit. She emerged in a lemon-shaped chamber of rock about 3 feet high, a luxurious amount of space after the tight confines of the squeeze she just came through. Tweeter waited for her there. It was sort of a crossroads. Many dark holes lined the walls leading off in various directions. Kai, on her stomach, looked at the quiet, imposing holes, and then looked at Tweeter. Bright, chirping, her only way out of here. Her head had cleared quite a bit. The bulk of her intoxication had been sweated out in the crawl space. She peeked into one of the holes. It trailed off into the dark, going somewhere. The quiet in the chamber was profound. It was enveloping. All the chattering and evening noises of the village above were gone, silenced. As she sat there in the chamber, other normally imperceptible noises became deafening. Her heartbeat, the stretching of her joints, the wheeze of her breath, and the patting of Tweeter's silver feet on the cool stone. She entertained the fleeting notion of leaving Tweeter's side and crawling into a random hole just to see how brave she was, but then gave up on the thought. She wasn't that brave. "Lead the way, buddy," she said, her voice bouncing around in the chamber. He hopped off toward a hole, the smallest one of course, and went into it. Now that her eyes were accustomed to the dark, and her head had sobered up a bit, she was amazed how much light Tweeter put off. She could clearly see his effervescent silver glow bubbling around on the other side of the hole ahead. She felt like she was in a darkened theater, looking at a brightly lit stage. Kai hauled herself into the hole and squeezed through again, having to force all the air out of her lungs to fit. She found that, though small, the hole opened up into a silent underground cavern, easily large enough for her to stand. Tweeter flapped his way up onto her shoulder and fluttered there, his light clearly illuminating the rocky features of the darkness-soaked cavern. The way ahead at this point was clear, and she started walking, following a long, gentle slope upward. As she made her way up the rocks of the slope, grunting and sweating, she could see why Sig liked doing this so much. It was actually pretty fun to move about in the dark, unseen, discovering what was there to discover. Just like exploring space, it required the same energy, the same spirit. She admired Sig's guts to do this in the dark all by herself. She felt ashamed for being jealous of her, and as long as she had Tweeter to keep her from getting lost and providing plenty of light to see, she found she was enjoying herself. It took her mind off of the ship that was now far away, the ship that she wanted to be on. She wished Dav and Sig were here. She wished they could explore the passages together, get filthy, get tired, and then wash out all the dirt and grime in a pub somewhere in the village. The Drunken Eel, that one was her favorite. She badly missed her friends. Why did she ever hand Dav her SK? Moving through the cavern was a complete sensory experience. It was cold in there, near 50 degrees, but as long as she kept moving, the temperature felt just right. The air was thick with humidity, near 100%, and with every wheezing breath she tasted the salts and silicates hanging in the air and felt the grit of minute eroded particles of rock in her teeth. She felt it condensing on her skin in dirty droplets. She could smell the minerals and the hard water, mixed with the slight perfume of her own sweat, marinated with traces of hard booze consumed hours ago. The rocks she treaded on were smooth, slippery with moisture, and stained with streaks of rust from the iron substrates above. Water dripped onto the rocks, and a quiet hammering made loud in the unearthly silence of the cavern. There were twisted formations overhead dripping water that reminded her of bacon. She'd had nothing all day, and a torrid liquid lunch, so she was feeling pretty hungry. She'd have to grab a snack when she got to the castle. The kitchens were always going. It was a rule Dav had that food always be available to those who were hungry. She imagined bacon and her favorite pancakes. Oh! With that rich, dripping, lip-smacking Nadine syrup they boiled down every morning. Kai remembered literally fighting with her sister Maya over the jugs of Nadine's syrup she brought home from Blanchford Castle. Her mouth watered with the thought. The cavern appeared to come to an end in a sloping wall of rock. Kai, scanning the rock face, seeing nothing, and certain Tweeter had led her to a dead end, but invariably he'd hop into an imperceptible fold of rock and push in with gusto, revealing a squeeze. Kai knelt down and was appalled. The rising and falling squeezes at first glance looked impossibly small, and without Tweeter's light, were nearly impossible to find. Taking a breath of gritty air, Kai plunged in after Tweeter, feeling the wet rock closing in on her in a uterine embrace, locking her into a twisted position. Her arms and legs felt far away from her, separated by an ocean of stone. Hard water dripped into her eyes, and the rubbing rock began irritating her skin, making it itch, but she couldn't reach her face to rub away the water or scratch with her stone-locked hands. She had to concentrate, forget about minor distractions like watery eyes and itching skin, and keep moving. Going forward, following Tweeter's light and accepting what the squeeze dished out, she was fine. Going back, plunged in darkness, was impossible. She emerged and basked in the open, humid air of the cavern, the luxury of freedom of movement a precious gift given back to her. Moving on, she eventually reached the top of the cavern, and Tweeter flapped into another crawl space, a more manageable one this time. As she readied to get in and follow him, she looked back once and did a double take. With Tweeter ahead in the tube, the cavern behind her was again plunged into thick darkness. Down far below, where she had been just a few minutes earlier, was a pair of eyes, glowing, animal-like, looking at her in the dark. Frozen in place, she instinctively reached for her SK, but of course it wasn't there. Swallowing, she entered the crawl space as fast as she could. Whatever was down there, she wanted no part of it. Soon she caught up to Tweeter. He was perched on the rungs of what appeared to be an ancient stone ladder, going up into the dark reaches. He fluttered upward, his light making a bright silver circle, illuminating the interior of the tube going up. Kai looked back toward the tube opening she just crawled through, remembering the eyes in the dark, and quickly she began climbing. After a long climb of about 300 feet, she emerged under a beach hanger in the vast Telmus Grove. The bright northern stars were out of the bag and glittering. Dav's looming castle, backlit in mute light. Here she was. She'd arrived. She couldn't believe it. She smiled and felt proud, like she'd just accomplished something. She sat for a moment on a low stone wall and enjoyed the night air. Normally, the air this time of night was too chilly for her liking, but after all that activity in the caverns below, the air felt good on her dirty, sweaty body. She wanted to come back soon and do this with Dav and Sig, to crawl in the unseen places. It was a lot of fun, except for the creature in the dark bit. She got up after a time and began toward the castle, walking easily. She followed Tweeter through the twisting passes where she let herself in with her key. She directed Tweeter to take her to the kitchens and had the staff whip her up a quick plate of bacon and pancakes dripping in dark brown Nadine syrup, just boiled. The staff eyeballed her filthy clothes and wanted her dress to wash, but she waved them off. Still flush with her adventure through the cavern, she sat down and ate with gusto and reviewed in her thoughts everything she'd experienced that evening. Creation, the food was good. She finished up and began to feel tired and dirty. Tweeter leading her to her tower. Pendar Tower, like most in Dav's castle, wasn't just a room. It was an entire self-contained, multi-leveled structure 100 stories tall, complete with bedrooms, sitting rooms, game rooms, bathrooms, terraces, and small libraries. The only thing it lacked was a fully functioning kitchen. If Kai had been more of a reader, she could spend days and days going through all the inviting books in the tower's main libraries. As Pendar Tower was usually reserved for guests, it had a lift that could speedily reach all 100 floors. Dav and Sig's Grandia Tower had no lifts. They simply wafted up. Blues. Gotta love 'em. She was tired. She unlatched the tower door and went in, eager for a wash and her bed. She went up the lift and approached the room that she had selected to sleep in. It was on the 63rd floor, adjacent to a large open-air terrace overlooking the village. There were plenty of rooms to choose from, but she liked this one for some reason. It had a nice bed that she found quite comfortable. The staff knew she liked her room warm, so they probably already had turned up the heat in the room. It should be nice and warm. She opened the door. The shining eyes in the dark of her room startled her, brought her heart into her mouth. She dropped her key. The eyes, fixed on her, approached in a lope. The comm officer entered Davidge's office, handed crewman Hartford a report pad detailing all current League activity and a stack of printed paper tags from the Marines, and left. As per usual tradition, the captain and first officer, or in this case, the acting first officer, sorted through all of the current League dispatches and tags and determined which were likely to be served. Usually, any imminent Zaffin movements received priority attention, followed by League matters, local situations, and so forth. It was up to the captain, the Admiralty traditionally having very little to say in the matter unless in times of war or the declaration of a general battle. Hartford read through the paper and the pad, his hand shaking a bit. "Take your time, crewman. Nothing to be nervous about. Care for something to drink?" No, sir. Thank you." He readjusted his papers, wiped off his pad, and read through them again. "So, crewman, anything hot out there?" Davidge asked after a time. "Sir," Hartford said, "we currently have no tags marked red. There are also no general call-outs or Zaffin issues. All quiet out there, eh? Good. Good. There are a number of call-outs from fleet admirals requiring ferrying." "Oh dear," Davidge shrugged. "Skip those." Hartford appeared shocked. "Sir, Davidge saw his discomfort. Clearly, to a crewman, a grand personage such as an admiral sounded impressive enough. However, most fleet captains at sea generally gave the landlocked admirals the brush-off. He sighed. "Well, all right, crewman, go ahead and read them." "From Pax, Admiral of the 9th Fleet, require immediate transport in show to Tantan for a summit meeting and League junket. Require warship of Stray Light configuration and 2 more in tail. Request per command Seeker. The Admiral hopes we will ferry him, sir." The tag also notes the Admiral has the programmability Profundi, and there could be profound consequences should his requests go unheeded. Davidge rolled his eyes. "Oh, profound consequences, eh? As you can see, I am shaking at the thought of what those consequences might be. Crewman, I hate ferrying admirals around. All the strutting and clucking, the entourage, every meal a full-blown formal affair, the gossip, and the Blue League nonsense. Can you imagine? And please, refresh my memory, as I wasn't really listening the first time. How many warbirds does he wish to inconvenience on his little joyride to Tantan?" 3, sir. 3 warbirds impressed into vagabondage. Why not 10 or 100? How about the whole 3rd Fleet go to Tantan with the Admiral? What a criminal waste of resources. Let him take a scout ship or a transport like everybody else for creation's sake. Tekkel-class scout ships are indeed marvels of engineering. And do you care for a brief lesson in League society? Shall I tell you why he wants 3 warbirds to go to Tantan? Yes, sir, please. If there's anything lords and ladies of the League are impressed by, it's frondage, an excess of things. A great amount of money, a great collection of clothing, beasts or spices, massive programmability, that's frondage. All of those things open doors and turn heads. So picture this, if you will. The Admiral arrives at his summit meeting with his little armada of warbirds in tow, hoping to sway the proceedings to his liking merely because of all the metal he has floating around in orbit. If he wants to dominate the day, I say let him do it with a scalpel wit and a speed of tongue, with naught but a scout ship to take him home when it's over. Hartford looked uncomfortable. But, sir, the Admiral has programmability profundity. Oh, really? If we're going to go in that direction, crewman, be aware that I have more programmability with the sisters than he does. I hold the Magni status, therefore his profundity is nullified. What is the Admiral's current location? Hartford was astounded. Clearly, Davidge's Magni impressed him. He looked at the pad. Sir, the Admiral is currently on Hoban. Ah, Hoban! Let's assume for a moment that my programmability did not outstrip his. Admirals such as he may usurp command of a fleet warbird if said vessel is within 100,000 stellar miles of his location. Fortunately, Hoban is much farther out than that, so therefore the Admiral is out of luck on multiple points. Hartford still looked dubious. Davidge relented. You're making me feel guilty, crewman. Has anyone already answered the charge? Yes, sir, several scout ships. Good. They can take him. You see, the Admiral be well served, and thank creation for it. Next. There was a soft knock on the door. Captain? Sig said from the other side. May I come in? Hartford looked at the door and stood up. Not now, Countess, Davidge said. Ship's business, I'll be out soon. Sig did that often, just to let him know she was still out there. She hated to be left out. If she really wanted in, she'd be pummeling him with telepathy. Davidge turned back to the crewman. What else? From Captain Burtis, MVF Gage. Require a fleet of vessels to go in force to Tobruk to extract delinquent tribute from the local sovereign. What? Davidge cried, outraged. We're collecting taxes now, are we? Oh, what have we become? Crewman, delete that tag from the pad at once, for creation's sake. Hartford deleted it. What's left? Davidge asked. He looked over his pad. Sir, there's a call from Captain Menander of the St. Cloud for a 4-ship combat box to quest to the Lyteal system for palladium. Interesting. We'll keep that one in mind. Next. That concludes the current tags, except for standard marine traffic. Marines! What do they have going on? Hartford looked through the notes. Troop transports, base resupplies, and the standard raider and pirate patrols. Read me a few. He read through the stack. From Commander Marine Vessel Wardener, Lieutenant Westrich of the 44th Marines. He reports he is in trail of a vessel of unknown configuration and requests a Marine detachment at Baz to assist in intercepting. Davidge thought for a moment. What is the heading of this unknown spacecraft? From Heron 7, it's bearing 3:30 a.m. of 10 p.m. Davidge brought up a 3D map and punched in the coordinates. A star map of the Heron 7 system popped up. Well, here's Heron 7, and just over here is Zaffin Space, he said, tracing the route out with his finger. Hartford spoke up. Sir, the notice is marked X for suspected raider/pirate activity, the usual purview of the Marines. Nonsense, crewmen, we're all one big happy league after all. Davidge gazed at the map. Let's plot solution and have a look. Besides, the marine vessel in tail is a brigantine that's barely bigger than a mail tender, and I imagine they shall appreciate the attention. Hartford stood back up. Aye, sir. I'll inform navigation at once. Excellent, and thank you, crewman, well done. Hartford opened the door and exited. Sig was standing there, leaning against a wall with her hands behind her back. Hartford greeted her, and she acknowledged him, allowing him to pass by, and then walked in, closing the door behind her. Well now, all the official stuff concluded, is it, Captain Davidge? May I have my husband back? David stood and poured her a cup of coffee. He sat back down and Sig got into his lap and toyed with his blue bangs. So where are we headed? She asked, taking a drink from her cup. Heron 7 to assist the Marines in tailing an unknown vessel. An unknown vessel? We don't normally do things like that, do we? Not normally, no. But I have a feeling about this one. He gazed at the 3D map, at Heron, at Zaffin's space nearby, and the planet Xandar, and the princess who wanted to kill him. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 4, The Cavern. So if you can't tell, I'm a big fan of caving. Love caving. And one of my favorite places to go is Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Been through it a lot. And what I described there is basically my experiences. You know, they're very, very cool in the cave, 50 degrees, very humid. You can really taste the minerals in the air. It's very dark, very quiet. The various cave formations, like the cave bacon and so forth, I've seen those with my own eyes. And then the thrill of a squeeze, that you walk up to a wall and there's a squeeze there. You usually really can't see it unless someone who knows the layout points it out to you. It just looks like a crack in the wall. And then once you look in, you can kind of see a passage and it looks really small. And you squeeze yourself through and you have to fight claustrophobia. It just feels like you're trapped in stone. Love it. I just love it. So I try to communicate that there in the chapter as Lieutenant Kylos follows Tweeter back to the castle. And Tweeter, from here on out, will be a fixture of the book. He is a Shadow Tech familiar created by Lady Poe, just one of the many little animals that she makes. And he is sort of like a GPS. You tell him where you want to go and he will get you there. You can trust the route he takes you, that it won't lead you into danger, or he won't lead you someplace that you can't possibly follow. And in this case, Kai told Tweeter, get me to the castle as quickly as possible. And Tweeter found a tunnel going under the village, underneath the mountainside and back up into the Telmus Grove. That is the quickest way to go. And Kai sees this little hole in the back of this grocery store and is appalled at first, but then is like, well, if Sig can do it, so can I. And she goes on this long adventure through the cavern, and when she finally makes it through, you feel like you've accomplished something, like you feel proud of yourself. It's like, I endured all of that, and I made it to my destination. Of course, she sees some sort of funky animal staring at her in the dark, and when she gets back to her room in Pendar Tower, something is in the dark waiting for her. Next week, we continue Part 2, Chapter 5, Carahill. So, we get into the meat of the story next week. I cannot wait to present it to you. Until then, we're going a little bit long. This is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.